It's our Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Committee of the whole for this meeting. Ms. Johnson, if you'll identify yourself.
Jennifer Johnston.
Bernie Hall, Tim Steele.
Bill Lovey.
Dick Trainee.
Elby Jackson.
Bossy.
And Pete is around it with us somewhere. Ms. Gray Jackson, I'll turn the time over to you. Well, if you're not going to throw
I
it.
like this. Anyway, first I'd like to, you already called the meeting in order, so we're going to do that, but I'd like to do introductions. And everybody has an agenda.
Okay, I'm Ross Risvold, Public Finance and Investments Manager.
Richard Whitehead, the Municipal Debt Officer.
I'm Kate Geyer, CFO.
Jennifer, we're doing introductions. Yeah, this is
We
the
are.
Budget and Finance Committee
We
meeting.
already
This
did
is
it.
Yeah.
You got it on there.
whatever. Anyway, at first I'd like to say thank you very much for pulling together a report at such short notice. And the reason for this committee meeting, we weren't going to have one this month or next month because we're really busy with operating and capital budget stuff. But our chairman wanted to have the committee to have a review of the MOA's bond history and status. So I really appreciate you putting this together, and the floor is yours, Ross. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Bob Oswald is going to present to you. He's the Director of Public Finance Community, and so this is his show. Richard will fill in where when Ross takes a deep breath.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't quite know exactly what this was about until I got an agenda here a little earlier, as LD pointed out. And but I did put something together last night and this morning that would that addresses what is on the agenda, as well as some other related points that are important to know about as we talk about municipal bonds and our capital improvement program and the financing of it. So on page 2, our current debt for general obligation bonds outstanding is as shown here at 12/31 of each of these years. This is general purpose debt, which is for general government and not for the school district. That is separate. And we'll talk about that a little bit too today. But I put one at the bottom. That's 10 years ago. The principal outstanding was $378 million. And back over the last 4 years now, we can see that the trend is downward in the principal outstanding for general obligation bonds. There's a note down there at the bottom. It says GO debt is principal only. If you take this and compare these numbers, which are principal only, to the CAFR, you might see a little difference because sometimes the accountants include accrued interest in there. But this is, we're talking about principal only in this presentation today. On page 3, as I mentioned, one of the associated side items that is important is the ratio of GO debt to assessed value of property in the municipality. It's a key rating agency item that they look at, and you can see 10 years ago it was 1.84%, and over the past 4 years it has been in a downward path. And the rating agencies like to see a stable or a low one or a decreasing one. Sometimes there's very valid reasons for them to increase over time, but we are going in the right direction with regard to what the rating agencies like to see. On page 4, one of the items on the agenda here is authorized debt not yet sold. And what this means is when the voters approve bond issues for capital improvement projects in April of each year, which they generally do, we sell the bonds subsequent to that at a later date when we need the money. We only sell debt when we need the money. So going back over the past 4 years for general government, general purpose, we have these amounts related to those ballot propositions, one or more ballot propositions in each of those years. It's total outstanding of authorized but not yet sold is $72 million for general government, general purpose. On the next page it shows the school district. We call it schools or school bonds. There's $68 million of authorization not yet sold, for a total of $142 million between the two of them. page 6.
Mr. Peter, go ahead, Elby, I'll let you
No,
know.
you got it, you take the floor.
Mr. Peterson, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairwoman. So if we wait to actually authorize these bonds, are we going to end up with the possibility we pay a higher interest rate? Because interest rates, even though they're low, have been edging up slightly. So is that something that we want to take into consideration? That we might want to do this sooner than later, so to try to capitalize on lower interest rates?
Ms. Jackson, Mr. Peterson, that's a good question. During the last 4 years or more since the Great Recession ended, I've been told numerous times every month that interest rates are going to go up. And they have done nothing but go down. And even in this year, they have gone down. So eventually, we expect that they will go up. However, we have done some testing, we call it shock test, where we say, what if we issued $50 million today, and what's our debt service? And we've said, what if we go into the future a couple of years and we raise the interest rates across the curve and issue debt then? And we've looked at that and we said, the amount you save in the meantime, there's a break-even point. The amount you save in the meantime versus how much it's going to have to raise, interest rates would have to raise to wipe out any savings for not issuing. We're still at a point where we don't believe that we should issue $142 million in debt just because we are still at historic lows. Typically, over the years, the 10 years that I've been here, and prior years that Mr. Whitehead has been here, and as well as Kate, we don't guess the marketplace. We don't try to time it. We issue debt when we need to issue debt, and typically we issue debt. Typically, it's every year. So if each year you're issuing a certain amount of debt that you need, even over time, you're going to time it. Your timing will be such that it sort of washes out.
Okay. I just thought I wanted to throw that concept out there.
It's a good question, and we are cognizant of that every day we come to work.
Thank you.
Mr. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm glad to hear, I mean, I figured that, but I'm glad to hear that debt is issued when needed. Because as everybody knows, when you issue debt, that's an effect on the taxpayer. So why issue it if it's not needed? So I really appreciate you emphasizing that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Garrett, can you tell us, not right now, but what these bonds for 11, 12, 13, 11, 12, and 13 equate to? Because if these were sold, I'd like to know what projects they were tied to. I don't need it right now, ma'am.
No,
but
I just want to take a second and, do we have one of those things that go up here? We have we don't, so I'll just talk it. It doesn't, I thought yesterday when LB presented this idea to me, that if a voter votes a bond, and if a voter votes something and then they authorize it, but we have it sitting out here in the pipeline, that we aren't starting the project. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we could have like a pipeline of projects that aren't started yet, and the voters authorized it 5 years ago. That, and I've been CFO before, and I still thought that. But Ross sat me down and said, when a voter authorizes it, OMB moves the budget and they start spending. And what they do is they borrow from the cash pool. So my voice is louder than Ross's, but he can explain that whole concept to you in about 5 minutes. And it's a thing of beauty how it works. They don't. They have a pipeline, but they're allowed to spend immediately. But what they're not doing is, so they're borrowing from the cash pool, which has a much lower rate. And then over time, they decide, okay, we're going to finance $35 million this year. We'll give the money back to the cash pool, and we'll keep going. It was a brilliant discussion, and it really opened my eyes, and I didn't know if other people may have thought, like I did, that only doing a limit of $35 million every year, Elby's smiling, so she probably already knew this, but I thought we would be creating this whole backlog of projects, and we aren't. It's amazing what they do, really. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Kate's correct, and the next 4 pages actually go into a little bit of detail of that.
I'll shut up, I was reading, sorry.
Sure.
Read this one.
To your question, we will provide the clerk, and she can distribute a sheet that shows all of the propositions for each of these 4 years and the projects and the associated projects.
Now, does the school district work the same way? Because I'm looking at a lot of bonds out here for school buildings. So they do the same thing? They don't stop?
They have a project list. They have a project list associated with their ballot proposition.
I think, Ross, what he's asking is, does the school district start construction like we do? Do they take the money once it's authorized and begin the project, or do they hold the project until the bonds
Sell
are
the
issued?
bonds.
No, they do the same thing. So as soon as we've loaded into the budget, they can spend
Thank
it all
you.
next week. I can go
Mr.
through.
Smith,
We'll go
Secretary, before
into
you
that
move
here.
on. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, we'll get into that on page 6, unless there's any other questions prior to that. This is all about debt and municipal bonds. And so there are many ways to finance a capital improvement program. And one is to pay cash, and we don't do that. What we do is like most local governments across the country do, is we choose to issue general obligation long-term taxes and bonds. Those are called municipal bonds. You hear corporate bonds, those are like taxable bonds that corporations issue. They're subject, the interest on those bonds is subject to taxes that investors earn. Taxes and bonds means that the earnings that investors receive is not taxable under federal tax law. We have 2 ratings, one by Standard & Poor's and one by Fitch. Our S&P rating is AAA with a stable outlook, and our Fitch rating is AA plus with a stable outlook. The AAA is the highest rating you can achieve by any rating agency, and the AA plus is the second highest you can achieve by any rating agency. And those ratings 10 years ago were approximately AA minus for example, so these ratings have clicked up over time. Now on page 7, I look at the CIP program and the financing thereof in basically two different parts. Each year, the departments bring their CIP plans and project lists to the administration. The department and the administration review those proposals and the appropriate projects, and they prioritize them, what's best for Anchorage. That CIP is presented in the Assembly for approval, and then the financing of the CIP is then presented to the Assembly in one or more bond ballot propositions for the April ballot. The Assembly reviews and passes that bond ballot proposition and then presents those propositions to the voters. On page 8, once approved and authorized by the voters, an ordinance is presented to the Assembly to appropriate those funds approved by the voters. Public hearings held a couple weeks later. Assembly reviews. Here's public input and passes it. They're going to pass it because they put it to the voters have authorized it, so it's natural that they pass it. And then the next day, the Budget Department puts it into, loads those funds into PeopleSoft, and they can start spending the next day. Has no bearing on when the bonds are actually issued. They can start spending as soon as it's in the budget. On page 9.
Minutes reflect that Mr. Hunterman joined us. There you go. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trini. And I look at the second part of this as part 2, which is financing the CIP. So the departments are out there spending away, doing the projects that the voters want done, that's in the best interest of the municipality. Now we need funds to pay for the CIP projects. Initially, for approximately 6 months, we will let them spend money, and we will pay for those capital expenditures out of the cash pool. This is an interim financing tool that we are lucky to have because we don't have to issue debt so that they can start financing it with our debt. We have a big cash pool, and we can finance it out of the cash pool.
How big is the pool, sir, we have?
As of August 31st of this year, our cash pool, all the dollars in the general cash pool that we manage in public finance, not counting police and fire trusts and MOA trust funds and that stuff, was $900 million. So we let the department spend into the cash pool for about 6 months, and then at some point in time, we ask those departments to forecast what they're going to spend by quarter for the next 2 years. We pick up the next 12 months, and this helps us establish a bond issue size. So we say, how much are we going to reimburse the cash pool for? And let's say it's $10 million. And then we say, Richard and the departments get together and they say, we're going to spend this much money in the next 12 months, and it's about $20 million, typically $25 million. So now we have about a $35 million bond issue to sell. So we sell that bond issue, and we take the proceeds, and we reimburse the cash pool immediately for $10 million. And now we set the other $25 million aside, and we set it in a project account with a trustee, and as departments make their capital expenditures, we reimburse the cash pool every month for those capital expenditures out of the bond proceeds. And then once those bond proceeds are depleted, we start the process over.
Tournament, sir.
So, catching on from the last page or so, that's how you save some of the money that's not needed on the bond sales, because as using the cash pool with lesser interest costs, you're not having to incur those expenses that you would eaten up by the payments that would be carried by interest. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Horniman, that's exactly right. We have, like I said, there's a sort of an interim financing tool we have. We use the cash pool. When those departments borrow from the cash pool, they have to pay an interest rate. They pay at the cash pool rate plus 50 basis points per code. And so if the cash pool rate, which is about 1% trailing 12 months right now, earnings, they're paying 150. If we issue bonds for them, they're paying 5% coupon bonds, although their cost of funds is about 3%. So they're saving at least half until we do a bond issue. So if we do a bond issue, if we don't do a bond issue for 6 to 12 months, those departments are still paying interest on the amounts they borrow, but it's at a much reduced interest rate environment. So it's there's a couple of different ways that the departments and the municipality and the taxpayers are benefiting from that financing tool.
If I may follow, just for the benefit of whoever may be listening in, the cash pool, it represents monies from where? So that, for instance, if it drops to 850 million, how do we make sure that it stays up around the 900 million, or does it fluctuate like a roller coaster?
The cash pool represents property tax collections in June and August of each year, which is at about $450 million approximately, $460 million, so that's a big chunk of that balance right now. So typically August 31st is the high. We have a seasonal fluctuation because of our spending and because of when we collect certain taxes. Otherwise, hotel, motel, and criminal taxes, they come in over the course of time. Municipal Light and Power has a big piece of that cash pool in their Beluga River fund, so all of that is in there. Anchorage Water and wastewater utilities, their equity is in that cash pool as well. But typically the seasonal highs and lows, the seasonal high of August and the low of May, in the low of May, is because of the rate at which we spend for general government.
You any other questions? Go ahead, sir, sorry.
I will go on to page 10. Page 10 is just a summary of what I just went over for the prior 3 pages. Basically, the Assembly approves the CIP. The Assembly puts that CIP and the dollar amount for bonds in front of the voters. The voters approve and authorize the sale of bonds. Departments spend into the cash pool. Bonds are sold to reimburse the cash pool and provide the next 12 months of spending for capital improvement projects. Debt issuance and the amount of debt issuance and the timing of that issuance has nothing to do with the impact at which the departments spend their money. It has nothing to do with the impact of what projects get done or how fast they get done. We in public finance finance the projects as they go. We don't have any impact. The debt issuance and the timing of that debt issuance doesn't have any impact on what projects get done or the speed at which they get done. Page 11 is it mine? Okay, that's me. Okay, page 11 is, we do have an unwritten debt issuance policy. It's comprised of two basic things. Each year, the municipality goes to the voters for authorization of debt for capital projects. That happens every year. For many years, I can't remember a year it hasn't happened, where we go to the voters and ask for authorization to continue our capital improvement plan. In the past several years, our policy has been to go to the voters for an amount that is equal to or less than the principal amount of debt being paid off in that current year. The second part of this policy is that they sort of go hand in hand, is the municipality will issue GO debt over time that is equal to or less than the amount of GO debt principal that we're retiring. And I use over time in this case because maybe a year goes by where we don't issue debt. So, but we're retired 30 this year and 30 next year. Now we have a 2-year window of time where we would issue 60 million or less. So that's our unwritten debt issuance policy. This policy is looked at very favorably by the rating agencies. It's one of the key factors, it's a material factor in supporting our AAA rating by Standard & Poor's and our AA+ rating by Fitch. So, like I said earlier, they like to see that one ratio go the way it's going on debt to assessed value. This is another material rating driver for ratings for the rating agencies. They both recommended that we formalize this policy, and we probably will do very soon.
Questions from Assembly members? Go ahead, sir.
Page 12, debt issuance forecast. How much debt are we going to issue? Well, as I just mentioned, we plan at this time to stay within the policy of issuing less debt than we are retiring in principal. In 2015, 16, and 17, the principal that's going to be retired is $36 million, $36, $38 million, for a total of $110 million. We may skip one of those years, so I wrote to be determined after each of those 3 years, and I said the total is 110. So over the next 3 years, we anticipate, if we follow that policy, we're going to issue less than $110 million. On page 13, as part of the ballot composition part of our policy is, again, the same $3 amounts are being retired. Column 2 there, 36, 36, 38. We would go to the ballot. We would propose bond ballot propositions to be put in front of the voters that are less than or equal to those respective dollar amounts, so it's less than or equal to $110 million. So,
Questions from Assembly members? Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. And this, Darrell, I knew a little bit, but just like you, this has been very enlightening to me. I'm sure for everybody else. I really appreciate the summary and the review, Ross. You did a really great job. And our chair, as I mentioned, wanted us to have this discussion. And as far as I'm concerned, I feel like the municipality's bond policy is really, really good. And I mean, on this agenda it says a recommendation to the Assembly, but the majority of us are here. So we've all heard what you had to say. And personally, I feel that the MOA's bond policy is a good policy. And I don't have any recommendations, so I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to see your policy when it comes forward and put it into law, because it's a good
pardon me?
policy. I want to see this come forward and be put into law rather than just a policy, unwritten policy. I want it out there because it's proven to be effective for this town. And Kate, this is one of the better meetings we've had. Thank you.
Thank you for the compliments, all of you.
Mr. Holman, Mr. Steele, sir.
So, and I get it from the municipal GO bonds. There may have been times, it recurs to me that perhaps the Denina Center was one of those. Does this same practice apply? Is it somewhat different for revenue bonds for projects? And how does that fit into the?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Horniman, Civic Ventures is a owned subsidiary basically of the municipality. And they did the Civic Center, it was a $110 million bond issue for that Civic Center and associated capital improvements at Egan. We don't expect that there to be any further debt issuance there anytime soon. That may happen this week, but that's sort of a standalone transaction. But your question does apply very good to municipal light and power and the water utility and the wastewater utility. Municipal light and power has a pretty sizable debt capital improvement program right now, and so their debt, this debt policy doesn't really fit there at this time. So it might be something they could look at later, but those revenue bond issuers and utilities, that they don't quite fit in this character, but it might be something worth looking at down the road here.
So a follow-up real quick on the Denina Center, was that revenue or a general obligation? It was kind of a unique thing.
Those, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Holman, those were revenue bonds, and they were based, and the revenue that supports the bonds for the Denina Center is that additional 4% tax that went into effect on January 1st, 2006. It used to be 8%, now it's 12%, and that 4% supports that, in addition to a portion of the 4% that goes to the group that supports tourism here in Anchorage. Anchorage now. So part of their 4% is pledged to it, but the 4% that's collected specifically for them is meant to support it, and it has been doing so satisfactorily since then.
So one last on that.
One quick one. We gotta go.
Can we just get when that projection is to pay off those bonds? When would that be?
That would be 2039. They were 33-year bonds issued in 2006.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Steele, sir.
I just think you need to be a little cautious about what you put into law. I think it's a great policy, great plan, and it's obviously proved that the process has proved good for us in terms of our rating and in terms of the downward trend of our debt. But at some point in time, if we continue this, we're going to eliminate debt. I mean, to a certain extent, all those outstanding bonds. And that's fine. We'd love to have that. But if you put in law that it has to be done that way, then you don't have the flexibility.
Okay, that ends this meeting. Next one starts immediately.